Hello and welcome, everyone. Super excited about the conversation today. So on the front end, yes, you will have access to this again. We'll put the recording on the YouTube channel, send out a link to that recording to each and every one of you. All right, so I'm going to play with just really being provocative. My first question to all of you, and I hope you're interested in just putting your comments in the chat box and sharing. Really want to see that. Looking at the topic of this, you'll know where I'm going with the question. Who is ready to move out of the dark ages? Yeah, we're there. With what's happening, it feels like we're there. So much is holding people back and holding people down. And it is not okay. It's time to move forward. Who realizes that diversity is a moral and ethical must? This isn't a choice. It is flat out the right thing. It makes sense. It's got to happen. And it's way overdue. I'm guessing you're with me on that one. We are so far overdue. Now, of course, here's the next big question. Who's perfect? None of us. As much as we all say, okay, we want this, we don't really know how to get there. We're wondering, am I doing the right thing? Am I messing up? How am I messing up? What do I have to fix? And yes, comment in, we all have bias. Welcome to the real world, right? We look to identify our biases, we look to move past them, and the reality is they're there, and sometimes we don't even know it. And so, yes, all of that is a part of this conversation. So a big thing to me is our ethics, and the question of how do ethics address diversity? Really curious about what you all think in response to that question. How do ethics address diversity? Let's get some things up in the chat box and share those, because ultimately, when we read the Coaching Code of Ethics and we read ICF's statement and we read ACTO's stand on this topic, more and more this is being addressed. It's coming out. Absolutely appropriately so. So I think that question is still a question. Let's see where we can get to through this conversation. So we're going to talk about ICF and diversity. And in that regard, we're going to look at specific points from the Code of Ethics that address diversity. We're going to talk about the competencies. Very specifically, there are things in the competencies that address diversity. And the same is true of the PCC markers. Which of those address diversity? So we're going to review all of them. And then my favorite point from ICF's Code of Ethics is doing good. So the update in point number 28 says, I adhere to the philosophy of doing good versus avoiding bad. I'm taking that as, in many ways, social justice. And yes, there's more, and that's a big piece of what's going to happen. So very significant to us. What are the keys to doing good? I'm going to start with this story here, and perhaps you've heard this one. A young child is walking along the beach with their grandparents, and all of these starfish have washed up on the beach, and the young child is picking them up and tossing them back into the ocean. And the grandparent looks at the child and says, well, what are you doing? And the child says, oh my goodness, if I leave it here, it's going to die in the sun. And the child continues throwing starfish in, and the grandparent says, you can't possibly save them all. There's too many. And the young child picks up another one and throws it into the water and says, I saved that one. And I think that's the key for all of us as coaches. We sit here and we think, okay, I'm one little old person. What can I possibly do that's really going to make a difference? How can I impact this or have an influence or whatever it is I can do? I'm only one person. And so we're going to look at what each of us can do individually to address the ethics of diversity. The first thing we can do is learn about this. And that means doing our own homework. Yes, reading, yes, researching, diving into it and learning more. Next, we can self-assess. Hey, where am I at? How am I showing up in this space? What am I doing? And what are my strategies for how I want to do that? On an ongoing basis, the ICF competencies now call on us to have a self-reflective practice. How can we do that? What can we do? How can we really make a difference with that? Communicate openness. It's fascinating. Sometimes we simply don't know what we don't know. We don't realize how it's being perceived or how it comes across. I know that I think I'm putting it across one way, and somebody says to me, no, that's not how it's coming across. It's like, oh my gosh, I've got to change that or fix that or whatever. So how do we communicate that openness? And me, one little old coach, what can I do to expand access? And exploring that. And then at the end, we'll look at a couple of case studies. So get ready to put your comments in the chat box for that one. We definitely got to have input from you. So the outcomes we want from this conversation, we are going to review specific points. I went through and just culled them out from the ethics, the competencies, and the markers that are pertinent to diversity. And I do realize this is all interpretation, so I'm giving you mine because that's all I've got. And I'm very happy to get your input and thoughts on it as we go through. We're going to explore doing good with those 5 different things that we can each do, and then discuss the case studies. So I'm posting on your screen ICF's statement of diversity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. I'm thinking you probably don't want me to read it to you. I believe all of you absolutely have the ability to read it yourselves and or to visit ICF's website where they have this statement. I do think what's significant to note about this is the awareness is there, and the work is begun and is moving forward to address this. And that's something that we are all called on to do. We're coaches, we have our code of ethics, we have our competencies, we have got to be part of this. So which of the codes from the code of ethics specifically address diversity? And if you happen to have your code of ethics handy, fabulous. I'm gonna pull up the numbers and put them here. If you see something I missed, tell me, let's share that. If you have thoughts or comments on the ones I do share, put those in here too. Let's hear from all of you. So number 11 in the code of ethics says, I'm aware of and actively manage any power or status difference between the client and ourselves that may be caused by cultural, relational, psychological, or contextual issues. So of course, one of the common things we think about is, oh, well, if I'm the coach, sometimes there's this perception that I'm the expert and there's a power differential just based on that. We're used to when we hire somebody for a service, like an attorney or a mental health professional or a financial planner, we see them as the expert. There's that power differential. So yeah, that can come in coaching. Well, there's a lot of other pieces that come in as well. Think about it. We go into organizations, we're engaged as coaches for people inside that company. We may or may not be the one they pick. Or we're privileged to have an individual hire us. And yeah, we're variations. We all have different cultural experiences. We all have different contextual considerations or issues. And so it's, as a coach, I've got to be aware of that. What does that mean? It means I've got to know myself and continue to explore that. And it means I've got to really get to know my client and explore it there. Another point from the Code of Ethics is to hold responsibility for being aware of and setting clear, appropriate, and culturally sensitive boundaries that govern our interactions, physical or otherwise. So a super simple example of this, in many countries of the world, a coaching agreement is done in writing. Well, there are some countries in the world where that's not okay. It's considered an insult. Well, where's the client? What's their culture? What's okay for them? That's one oversimplified element of this. And there are so many more. If you do meet clients face to face, and I know during COVID that's changed for many, and even pre-COVID, 80% of coaching was done on the telephone. At the same time, there are coaches that are meeting with clients. And then the question comes up, okay, do we do a handshake? Do we do a hug? Is this okay? Is this not okay? What's appropriate? And being able to have that conversation, because the answer is different for each person. And it's okay to have the conversation and figure out, hey, what works for this individual? Number 25. Well, we've got the obvious, avoid discrimination by maintaining fairness and equality. Oh, wow, this goes so much deeper. And for those of you who are enmeshed in this topic, you're familiar with the difference between equality and equity and the removal of barriers, because they're all different. And so for us in coaching, when we do coach training, one of the things we talk about is treat people the way they want to be treated. The platinum rule coined by Dr. Tony Alessandro. Well, it isn't what I think is appropriate or right. It's really about them and what works for them. And so, yes, it includes the age, the race, gender expression, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion, national origin, disability, military status. They're really working to include all of those different considerations. So if ICF is working to include that, and that's now in our Code of Ethics, what are we doing to be aware of this and to take this into consideration when we're working with individuals? And how do we ensure that the way we're interacting truly is respectful to them? Number 28, being aware of our and our clients' impact on society. And then this favorite statement here, adhere to the philosophy of doing good versus avoiding bad. So perhaps you're familiar with the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. Now we're going beyond that, and we're taking this proactive measure of, hey, it's on me to do good. How are we proactively doing good? And I love that that's here. I also think about the impact we have on society and the impact our clients have on society and what the potential is within that. Those are ones I pulled out. Curious, in the chat box, share thoughts on what I just shared, those points of the Code of Ethics. And if you notice something else that I missed, share that too. So in terms of the ICF Code of Ethics, what do you think on the points we shared, and what else do you believe is appropriately included here? Oh, I love this comment. This is a great comment that came in the chat box. What does doing good mean is really where this is going. What we think is doing good may be different than what somebody else thinks is doing good. And that's such a valid point. And what do we even do with that? Because when we think about, okay, if I'm going to be proactive and do good, my thinking is based on what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. And so how do I make sure that that doing good really is good for the majority. Really is making a positive difference. So that's a great point. I see a hand up and I'm wondering, is that mean you want to come on live and say something? And if you'll just put a note in the chat box, I can unmute you and you can come in live. Up, hand went down. Okay, so maybe further in. we'll look for that. Oh, I see the hand back up. Does that mean you want to come on live? Yes, okay, I'm gonna unmute you then. All right, you're unmuted.
Hi, it's Lucy. I started to type it out, but it might be easier to just say it out loud. So an example would be over the past year with the whole Black Lives Matter, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And people's perceptions of doing good, you know, were very different depending on which side of that coin. So in the spirit of diversity and all, you know, I'm seeing my interpretation of the ethics for diversity means something very definitive to me. And if someone's coming from a different opinion and, you know, I mean, you know, some other extreme, you know, alt position, they might not be agreeing with that.
Yeah.
And so, and yeah.
So it's so true. And then it's, okay, and what do I do about that?
Right. So let me actually get to the core of the question, I guess. I had a conversation and with somebody around that time frame in a study that I was doing. So I was a student at the time, and it was about don't put anything on your business pages about what we're going through with social injustice at this time. That was the direction that was being given.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggled with that one. I was wondering what your thoughts were.
You know, I think there's all sides of that. It's like
I know.
what you're saying. It's because on the one hand, people are looking at it and saying, yeah, you don't want to antagonize anyone. And if you put something up, it might be the wrong thing, or you might antagonize someone because they have a different opinion. And then if we don't put something up, are we condoning what's happening, or not supporting what's happening, or whatever it is? Mm-hmm. And so I wish there was a clear, easy answer. You know what came up for me when you were talking and sharing that is I think about when my kids were little, and yes, it's been a while, everyone. I know you all know that. At the same time, you think back on it, and as a parent, each day you get up and you do things to the best of your ability. And then you look back on it, in hindsight being 2020, you go, oh man, I messed that up. Or gosh, I could have done a much better job of that. Or, oh my goodness, I can't believe I thought that was a good idea, or whatever else it was. Mm-hmm. And then I think we also have to give ourselves grace. We do what we do with our own best intentions, based on our knowledge, what we think seems the best and the right thing. Does that mean we're perfect? No, none of us is. We're still going to mess up. And are we okay with messing up and accepting other people messing up and having the conversation and learning from that and continuing to move forward? I hope that's helping, Lucy.
Yeah, pause, right?
Yeah, thinking.
I guess I see a third angle on would be, you know, if you know, defining what my mission and value statement is in my practice, right? And having the courage and freedom to be able to share that, so that people know, I have this, I trust that the people who come to me are the people who are supposed to be coming to me, and I show up as my authentic self in whatever way that is. And I align that with my missions and my values statement. And so, there's boundaries, there's lines I won't cross. I'm cautious about certain things, and yet at the same time, so there's the, what might your clients think about it? What might you think about it? And, I think the spirit of letting people know who you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Love it. Thank you for bringing that in, Lucy. Appreciate that.
Yep.
In the meantime, we've got another comment in the box, and the person is saying, what about number 17? And so I look at 17, and it says, recognize my personal limitations or circumstances that may impair, conflict with, or interfere with my coaching performance or my professional coaching relationships. And I love that you brought this up, because initially when I read that, I know that what they're referring to is if I need help, if I've got to go get mental health or counseling or whatever else, that I'm to take this. And if we go further with it, my personal limitations or circumstances, who I am, and is that going to interfere? What that brings up for me is having the privilege of working with people that are very, well, and here's an interesting challenge just in that I'm used to saying very different from me. And somebody said, how's that perceived? We're all variations. And so talking about variations instead of differences. So variations in terms of culture and background and who they are. And I'm talking race and gender and sexual orientation. And perhaps many of you have also had clients that were different than you in terms of race or gender or sexual orientation or any of the other possibilities. And do our personal limitations get in the way? And my thought around that is, when we talk about being a coach, we talk about being a subject matter expert versus a process expert. So my job is not to be a subject matter expert. My job is to be a process expert. Is there value in subject matter expertise? It depends. Sometimes there is, sometimes it gets in the way of coaching someone else, because if we have subject matter expertise, we go into it, quote unquote, knowing the answer. Whereas if we stay in our place of process expertise, we can use subject matter expertise to inform questions. So then I go back to personal limitations. Okay, so if I'm a different gender or a different race or a different sexual orientation, is that going to impair or conflict in that relationship in terms of that performance? I think it's more about, am I open? And am I curious? And am I supporting them exploring different perspectives for themselves? So that's, I love that you brought that up. Those thoughts are just off the top of my head. I'm curious how you feel about that. And while I give you a minute to do that, I'm going to start bringing up additional things from ICF. So similar to what I did with the Code of Ethics, I went through and I looked at the competencies. And I really looked for, okay, which competencies are speaking to diversity? Hopefully, again, you all have access to your list of competencies. Tell me what you think about the ones I'm sharing. Tell me what additional ones you think want to be in there. And while we're doing this, please, additional comment on including number 17 in the Code of Ethics. So looking for that too. So in terms of the competencies, our first competency is demonstrates ethical practice. And so understanding and consistently applying coaching ethics and standards. Within that competency, it specifically says demonstrates personal integrity and honesty in our interactions with clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders. Next is sensitive to the client's identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs. Uses language appropriate and respectful to clients, sponsors, and relevant stakeholders. And to me, this encompasses what's got to be behind diversity. It's our integrity, our honesty, being sensitive to others, and working to use language that's appropriate, respectful to everyone. The next one's from the Code of Ethics. Embodies a coaching mindset. Develop and maintains a mindset that is open, curious, flexible, and client-centered. So point number 2 says, engages in ongoing learning and development as a coach. We're all doing that right now. We do that every time we attend continuing education and seek more training. Develops an ongoing reflective practice to enhance one's coaching. So I've got a couple of things later on that support the reflective practice. And I know this was a question that was submitted ahead of time. Everybody's different in what that reflective practice looks like. Some coaches journal. Some coaches work with the supervisor coach and explore the coaching session after. Hey, what happened? How did that work? And the learning and insight from it. Some coaches use yoga or meditation for this. So some coaches will sit down and just jot notes. Hey, what happened? What went well? What do I want to do differently? And they reflect back on the session. So there are a lot of different ways. I'm going to give you a couple of exercises later that are helpful in this regard. So I hope that's at least a start on answering the question that was submitted ahead of time. Number 4, remains aware of and open to the influence of context and culture on self and others. And 5, uses awareness of self and one's intuition to benefit clients. So noticing things. One of the things that comes up here, going back to that number 17, when we have clients that are from a different gender or race or sexual orientation or whatever it is, okay, gosh, what do we do with that? How is that going to work? And at the same time, it's, you know what, if I'm open, curious, flexible, and client-centered, I'm all about the client, I'm on their side, I'm supporting them, it may be that my intuition comes from my lens, yes, and is it something that's worth exploring with the client? Is it going to serve the client? And so that's a deep consideration when we think about what we're sharing. Another one, cultivates trust and safety. Partners with the client to create a safe, supportive environment. Even our perception of a safe, supportive environment, by the way, is going to be different for each person, so that the client feels comfortable sharing freely and we maintain that relationship of mutual respect and trust. Seeks to understand the client within their context, which may include their identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs. You know, one of the things that jumps out at me, perhaps you've heard the term cultural competence. And I've had conversations with people, cultural competence, what does that mean? How does that work? And the reality is cultural competence means having a level of understanding and competence in all different cultures. And when you think about it, there's so many different cultures. Is that even possible? I mean, one person is going to invest their entire life and probably still not get there. And so it goes back to that openness and that curiosity and that acceptance and being able to have the conversation. So we're seeking to understand them within their context. Demonstrate respect for the client's identity, perception, style, and language, and we adapt our coaching to the client. Demonstrates openness and transparency as a way to display vulnerability and to build trust with the client. Saying, wow, that's an area that I don't know anything about. I really want to learn. I want to be open to that, and being okay not knowing and saying that we don't know. So being vulnerable with our clients. Listens actively, focusing on both what they're saying and what they're not saying, and what is being communicated in the context of the client systems? So we're supporting client expression. And under that, the first point talks about considers the client's context, identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs to enhance understanding of what the client is communicating. And of course, the more it's different from our own, the more we have to work at this. What don't we know? What are our own hidden biases? How can we move past those? Competency aid evokes awareness, facilitates client insight and learning by using tools and techniques such as powerful questioning, silence, metaphor, or analogy. And specifically within this, considers client experience when deciding what might be most useful, ask questions about the client, such as their way of thinking, values, needs, wants, and beliefs. This to me is a fabulous one. It speaks to that openness and curiosity and really learning about them and understanding them. And then number 8, helps the client identify factors that influence their current thinking and their future patterns of behavior, thinking, or emotion. Again, it may well be that there's more here. Very much interested in your thoughts or comments on what I have brought up and what additional elements from the competencies you believe are appropriately included here. So, thoughts or questions? I'm watching the chat box. I'm looking to see if somebody's going to raise their hand and wants to come in live again. And I'm getting lots of quiet out there. So help me out. I can't see you. I can't hear you. Give me something in the chat box and tell me where you're at with what we've just covered. And if you're ready for me to move forward into the PCC markers, say so. Okay, so I see you have a question again. If you want to unmute again, you have that option.
Okay, I'm here.
I'm so glad I got one. It's sometimes people are hesitant to come on live. It's like, no, I love it when you come on live. So go ahead.
Let's talk. So I love the conversation about the growing in the intuition and getting into that space. I was wondering what, yeah, I teach a lot about the clairs, I call them, right? The clairs, which is where intuition kind of draws into. What opportunities are there out there for people who are trying to explore that more?
In terms of
exploring to grow personal intuition.
Wow. So I think about, for example, even just this kind of conversation, I think about, we've got one coming up on using ancient wisdoms as a coach. Those kinds of things. I think there are webinars all over the place. I also think in terms of intuition, there are programs that really focus on intuition. The biggest thing, ironically, I think is I noticed a lot of coaches in training really have good intuition, and it's a matter of them trusting themselves. And trusting themselves means their own confidence, and it means taking the risk and starting to explore what they're noticing or what's coming up, trusting their gut and going with it.
Awesome.
And I know that's simplistic. That's not the same as going into a deep dive in the training side of things.
It is a place to start. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And I'm thinking you have way more expertise on that than I do, because I know you do a lot of work in that space.
Yeah, as a Reiki practitioner and teacher. Yeah, it's definitely, very high, and it's a big part of that training to just trust yourself, what comes to you, and how do you find that space, and then how do you grow and evolve in how that information is coming to you, is a whole conversation as well.
Well, I mean, you've got Reiki, you've got meditation.
Yep.
People talk about yoga as a tool for that. And
Yeah.
I've had people in that talk about literally different activities and exercises for developing your intuition.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I feel like that's outside my area of expertise.
Yeah. I am curious about the ancient wisdom class. I did sign up for that, so that'll be
That'll be fun.
fun. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Awesome.
giving
Awesome. Okay. Well, I am going to keep going. That's all I'm seeing there. So we're going to move into the PCC markers. And so some of you are familiar with these, some of you aren't. The PCC markers very specifically are the list of behaviors that are sought in a recording when you're submitting to earn a credential. These are the behaviors that demonstrate your competencies as a coach. And so which of these specifically address diversity? Again, if you have a copy, great, pull it out. Share your comments on the ones I'm sharing, and share if you think I missed something and there's more to appropriately include here. So 5.1 says the coach acts in response to the whole person of the client, the who they are. And to me, that includes culture, context, etc. 5.4, coach demonstrates curiosity to learn more about the client. Again, getting to know them. Coaches' questions and observations are customized by using what the coach has learned about who the client is or the client's situation. Again, speaking to who they are. 6.5, the coach inquires about or explores how the client currently perceives themselves or their world. 7.1, the coach asks questions about the client, such as their current way of thinking, feeling, values, needs, wants, beliefs, or behaviors. And 8.6, the coach partners with the client to consider how to move forward, including resources, support, or potential barriers. To me, the resources, the support, the potential barriers speak to their context. So those are the ones I saw. And I'm sure I'm missing something. I'm sure there's more value add on the ones I brought up. So please feel free, if you want to come in live, raise your hand, let me know you want to come in live. If you have an additional comment, put it in the chat box. Very much interested in hearing those thoughts. I'm pausing to give you a moment for that. All right, and based on the quiet, I'm going to jump into doing good. So in going through and researching and exploring and, hey, what can I do? One person, how can I approach this? Those of you that are familiar with our Coaching Perspective series, my chapter this year is on this topic specifically. I've been having a lot of fun with it. Love to get input from all of you to really take that to the next level and take this conversation to the next level. So first off, the first thing that we can do as an individual is learn more. The second, self-assess and then strategize. The third is the self-reflective practice. The fourth is communicate openness. The fifth is work to expand access. We're talking about expanding access to coaching. So in terms of learning about diversity, we can do research and reading. So I'll give you some examples. I was digging into this and I was researching about diversity and I was looking at multiple areas. I looked at race, I looked at gender, I looked at the LGBTQ piece. I looked also at disability, and by request, I looked at biases against somebody who's heavy, overweight, religious biases. So there's so many. And the research is absolutely fascinating. And it goes back to some of the bias is so systemic and so subtle, we don't even know it's there. I'll give you some examples. So I was doing my research, and one of the statistics that I came across is that if there is a car accident, women are 47% more likely to suffer traumatic injury. And the reason for that is that cars are designed based on the male body. That's an inherent systemic bias that we don't even know about. It's hidden. We don't even realize it. It's like, wow. Another one, and this one I was more familiar with. I learned a lot by continuing to read and explore it. Unsure if any of you have heard of the term called redlining. I knew that one because I used to have a real estate broker's license. Redlining was a term where literally they would take a red marker and on a map draw a line around a neighborhood and put a limit on who could live there based on race. So way back in the day when the suburbs were first being built in the United States and they started the federal homeowner insurance plan, our federal government redlined neighborhoods. And they said only white people can get loans in these neighborhoods. I'm like astonished. You know, in theory, this was the 20th century. It's like, whoa. Think about the impact that had. So we know the impact it had then. People weren't allowed to buy houses. Now extend that out. Because in this country, so many people build wealth based on housing. You know, we buy a house, we improve it, the value increases, we sell it, we move up, we pass that wealth on to the next generation and to the next. Well, guess what's going on now? Generations later, families are impacted by that redlining that was done way back when. And that is further compounded by another big piece that affected that community. There was a bank that was 90% Black depositors, customers in the bank, and the bank went under, and it didn't have the federal insurance that we have now on bank deposits. And so these people lost everything. And what they learned is to not trust the bank. And then guess what they taught their kids? And guess what their kids taught their kids? And so you have this big bang, double bang, and now we have what's called the underbanking of the Black community. So that's, I mean, a huge example of the impact. And then another piece of research, and I mean, this is unbelievable to me. 19% of trans and gender non-conforming people have been refused healthcare outright, literally told, nope, sorry, you're trans, we're not going to take care of you. Are you kidding me? I'm like astounded that that's even happening. Let's see, on the news yesterday. Okay, so I don't watch TV, so this will be news to me. NFL treating Black concussion players differently based on testing parameters that Black person would have started with a lower cognitive ability. Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh. And then they get decline the compensation with the injury. That's insane. And it's like, in today's world, is that even anywhere near acceptable? This all speaks to how important it is that we all be doing our own research and reading and learning, because we don't know this is going on until we put in the effort to learn about it. And when we learn about it, then we have the ability to address it, to speak to it, to say, okay, what can I do? Where can I have influence? This is absolutely not okay. And we've got to understand what's going on. Let's see, in a comment, this is why there's total eruption. Yes, all of the protesting and the unrest and that kind of thing. So I got a question about, really interesting, the recording will be on YouTube. So if you want the information, if you missed it or whatever, you can come back to YouTube and catch it later. I'll send a link to everyone who registered. All right, so I'm going to keep going. What can I do individually when we talk about learning about diversity? Conferences and workshops. The good news is today more than ever, there are conferences and workshops available on this topic. You can attend, you can learn. That is a place to gain knowledge and have conversations, and have the conversations outside of there as well. Because the more we all talk about it, the more we can do it. So we've got to take ownership ourselves to continuously learn. It's one of our areas of competency anyway. And this is a huge area in terms of what we've got to do. Now, once we are committed and we're doing the learning, and by the way, that's ongoing, that's forever. What we want to do is also think about, okay, where am I at? So self-assess, really evaluating, where are you now? What's your ideal? And what's your plan for getting there? And so one of the things I did as a business is I went back and I looked, okay, where are we at now? Who's on the team? What's the face of our team look like? And exploring that. Hey, what are we expressing in the way we're putting ourselves out there? Hey, what are my beliefs? What are my known biases? And how can I identify my unknown biases? So we're self-assessing. And then, of course, we've got to be thinking, what is ideal? And how do we get there? And to me, this is an ongoing process. It's an investment of time and effort. We've got to be moving in that direction. We've got to be thinking about what makes sense. I'm really excited to share more on the self-reflective practices. I know that there were questions on those earlier, and so this is the chance to get into that here. So first off, self-reflective practice. Number one, it's about scheduling time. We all know how busy everyone is. People have crazy lives going on. Yes, that's a given. So if we're going to be intentional about this, it's literally planning the time for it. In terms of how we can do that, so a couple of things that I've learned between different conferences and conversations. One of them I think is super cool. A self-reflective practice is when you get a new client, take time to sit down and write about that client. Who are they? And I get it, you don't know yet. You barely know them. That's perfect, because you'll write based on what your perceptions are. And that's where the assumptions we make show up. And take the time to do it. Yes, it's a risk. You don't have to share it with anyone else. It's a risk you're taking with yourself. And to write about that client. And then 6 months from now, take a blank piece of paper and write about your client. And then take those two different writings and compare what you thought you knew then versus what you know now. And it will help you identify what some of those assumptions or biases were. So this is this fabulous tool as far as a self-reflective practice. Another one that I learned, and some people love this one and some people hate this one. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer for this. Perhaps you've heard of what's called a cultural bio. So a cultural bio is really just writing about yourself and who you are. So for example, I might put in a cultural bio, as a kid, I'm one of 13 kids. I have cousins that are Black. I have cousins that are Latino. So I grew up in a diverse family. I might talk about being married and having children and now being a grandmother. I might talk about having lived in South America and experiencing a different culture that way. So a cultural bio is a way of pulling in all of these different pieces that feed into your culture and context, and it's a way of putting yourself out there. And when you do that, you're exploring that, it's self-awareness, and it's a vulnerability when you put yourself out there, because coaches put their bios on their websites. How much are they bringing in all those different elements in terms of the diversity. Some of you have seen people will put in their signature line the pronouns that they prefer. So that's another way of expressing that. I think an additional great self-reflective practice, and this was actually done in a conference I attended, they had everybody write down 5 of their successes in life, what those were. And then they had you take a different identity. One example, if you were a different race, a different example, if you were a different gender, whatever it may be, take a different identity and then reflect back. How would that have influenced your ability to achieve that success? And so another way of simply becoming aware. Ultimately, this is what we want to do, develop our awareness. Multiple options for this, investing the time and the effort in it. Now, on an individual basis, a third thing that we can each do is fourth thing, communicate openness. So when we say communicate openness, what do we mean by that? One of the things that I included when I went and did the self-assessment was looking, okay, on the website, what are the images we use? What are the words we use, the languaging, and how does that have an impact? So think about it. If every single image I use, the people look pretty much the same, like if they all look like me, is that communicating openness? No, it isn't. And so being very intentional about that, because there's a message behind it. And even the words that we use, there's language that has negative connotation. Now, with a nod, Lucy, to you and what we were talking about earlier, different people have different perceptions. So for example, oftentimes people talk about helping. Well, how many people really want to be helped? And so in coaching, we talk about partnering. An example, if we say accommodation, it's, oh, we have to accommodate you because you're less than. It's like, wait a minute. It's an adaptation to make this work for everyone. We talk about tolerance. Well, what we're really intentionally wanting is respect. I mentioned earlier equality versus equity. So variations of our language, and even using the they, their, them language on our websites instead of the he, she. So think about how you're communicating, and does it express a level of openness? So do the images include variations? Does the language demonstrate an openness and a regard for everyone? And then our next area, what can we do on an individual basis for expanding access? So think about what your opportunities are as a coach to increase access to coaching services. There are nonprofits that are providing coaching to the people they serve, or the leaders are going to benefit from coaching because the leaders in those nonprofits want to ensure the efficacy of what they're doing and expand their services and reach more people. On an individual level, have you thought about a sliding scale? So having clients that even if they can't pay full price, what can they pay? And being open to working with that and treating them with every bit the same amount of respect and regard as the one who can pay more. Because it doesn't matter what they can pay. What matters is that they're there because they want to improve. They want to create meaningful change. And our job is to be there and to support them. And then look at opportunities to collaborate. Are there sister cities you can work with, your city and another city? Are there other nonprofits? Can you join some of the ICF efforts where they're providing coaches in different areas? what are the ways you can collaborate? Can you get into your school system and support things happening there? So there's so many possibilities, and I realize we can't impact everyone. So it's each of us picking up that next starfish, throwing it in the water and saying, yeah, made a difference for that one. And looking at what can we do on an individual basis. So a couple of examples to play with, and I'm hoping you'll share comments on these. Here's the first scenario. Let's say you've been engaged to coach a high potential inside of an organization, and your client shares with you that their biggest challenge is dealing with the biases and the microaggressions. And let's say this is one of your hot buttons. What are you going to do as a coach to support them? So share your thoughts in the chat box. Raise your hand if you're willing to come in live. Let's get a conversation going here. And while you're all thinking and taking a moment, a question came in earlier. Would a cultural bio actually go on one's website or be for self-assessment purposes? I'm going to say both. In terms of putting it on your website, not that it's the front page, it's usually later on. People come to your website, they check out what you offer, your services, that kind of thing, and then dig in further as a way of getting to know you. Does your cultural bio attract your clients? Depends on who your clients are. And it's also a level of vulnerability and risk taking. So I don't think I have a clear cut, yes, no, do this, don't do this. It's really an assessment process, an evaluation process of what makes sense for you. So a couple of comments on this scenario that we've got up. One is listen, be open, do not judge. And then the other said, I would approach the issue of the client by unpacking it. And then what are the circumstances of the challenges? What are they? Find out specifically what biases and microaggressions they've dealt with. Yes, so definitely exploring it. And of course, the key is if this is a hot button for you, how do you make sure that hot button isn't getting in the way? And that challenge. So we definitely want to explore it. What are their experiences? How did they want to frame those experiences, those microaggressions? How did they want to face that so that they are moving forward effectively? And as coach, how are we keeping ourselves out of the way? Knowing that we just have a couple minutes left, I'm going to bring up the other example. So let's say you're working with an individual who is focused on their own leadership role in their community. And let's say they're a leader in the religious community. And let's say you are really interested in supporting LGBTQ, and this leader is against that. How are you going to handle that? And by the way, another question came in for the last one. It's a really good one. Asking yourself as a coach, why are they hot buttons for you? So that's a really good way of considering your own awareness. Now for this one, how are you going to deal with this client who has a very different value than you do? And while you're all thinking and hopefully typing, I'll share with you, there was a conversation in one of the base camps for ICF. It was actually an opposite scenario where the coach had a religious bent and the client was the opposite. And so then the coach saying, I'm not the best coach for this person. And then there was this huge discussion about, okay, wait a minute, that's the coach being biased and they can't do that. And somebody else saying, well, our ethics talk about, am I going to be the right coach for this client, and looking at that. And there's this huge back and forth on the topic. And what does it really boil down to? Because on the one hand, am I going to be effective coaching this person if my belief system is totally in the different direction? Versus, is it appropriate for me to let my biases get in the way? And it's truly a balancing act. And how do we handle that? Because as a coach, my job is to support the client based on who they are. At the same time, I've got to know that I'm going to be effective from their client. So here's a good question. Ask yourself, can you separate yourself from the client's goal to improve their leadership role? And then the other comment, be fair and non-judgmental of the client. So good thoughts. All right, a couple of closing questions for you. What review of the ICF information will you do? How will you prepare to do good? And what is your action plan? So challenging you moving forward. Thank you all so much. There's been some great feedback as we've gone through. Definitely appreciate having you here, the openness to the conversation. So really good in this regard. I am happy to hang around and speak to additional questions if anyone wants to stay. And I do realize we have used our time for those who have to jump. So thank you, everyone.